Today, re-editing some of my favorite images from 10 years ago with modern photo editing tools to print big, and why I think editing to print yourself really will level up your editing skills and the way you look at editing. You'll get better images for it. Well, hey everyone, it's Hudson. Welcome to this week's video. So I've been doing a ton of editing and going back through old photos and picking different images that I think I might want to consider for inclusion in sort of a 20 image portfolio of things that represent me, which will eventually go up on the website alongside Rick's and David's, and also in large prints. You know, for me, for an image to be worthy, it really needs to be able to print large. And for me to get the edit right, you know, you'll find that as you edit images to print yourself, you're going to find that those edits get stronger and stronger and stronger as the print gets better and better and better. It's this iterative process, you know, and it really is a process for me where I find that every time I've worked to make sure that an image prints well, it winds up being far better than the edit I did for screen that I thought I was satisfied with before. And I'm going to show you what I'm talking about with some images that I really struggled with 10 years ago. 10 years ago, when my wife Stacy and I were on a trip to Europe for our good friend Duncan's wedding in Greece, and we wound up spending a little time in Turkey, then Greece, then Italy, then France, and we took a side trip to climb Stromboli, this active volcano just off the coast of Sicily. It's an island that juts up this volcano coming off the sea bottom. And it was an amazing, amazing adventure. I'll take you along on it as I walk through, but some of the images at Blue Hour with just the colors from the volcano in Blue Hour were so complicated. In the days before we had raw masking and some of the power that we have now for raw processing, it was just a little bit tricky. So I thought, you know, there were some images there. That was a trip I really was excited about. I wanted to pull a few of those and look at whether or not they ought to be potentially included in my portfolio, even though I'd had struggled mightily to print them before. So let me jump in. I'm going to get on the computer. I'm going to show you some prints. I'm going to show you the process that I go through, editing, test printing, and then come through and show you the final prints that I got from these. All right, so we'll jump in here. I'll just give you a little background. It was before I had my kids. My kids are 8 and 9, almost 8. My daughter turns 8 tomorrow, actually. But Stacy and I took off on this trip, and we flew into Istanbul. There had been a terror attack on the airport there, and it was cheap to fly in there, and I'd always wanted to go. So we went, toured around, explored Istanbul a little bit, the old city of Constantinople, went into some of the tremendous churches and mosques, like this ancient Coptic Christian church, the Hagia Sophia, the Blue Mosque, and we found out while visiting the Blue Mosque that Stacy was pregnant and we were going to be parents. It was quite an epic trip. We went to our good friend Duncan's wedding in Greece and had a wonderful time in Thessaloniki and out on the islands, did a little kiteboarding even, although we were careful because Stacy was pregnant. And then we hopped over to southern Italy. We had an amazing adventure on the Amalfi Coast. Found it a bit crowded, but spectacularly beautiful. And we hopped a hydrofoil to head out to the island of Stromboli, which is as spectacular as the movie El Postino makes it. It is really a special, special place. And one of the things that you can do there is you can rent a helmet, face mask, hiking boots, and poles, and hike up to photograph Stromboli. Now, we chose to do that to get up there at sunset and be able to stay for an hour to be there for Blue Hour and photograph it. You know, I organized that in advance with the operation that led people. You have to have a guide to go up there and do it. And I'm not sure what the rules are now. About 6 years ago, there was a violent eruption up there. I believe 1 or 2 or 3 people were killed. They had to evacuate the island. And I'm not sure what the rules are on hiking up there anymore, although I would still love to go back and do it. You can see this was sunset. And actually, when that erupted, I did another video that was largely a sort of a slideshow story of the entire trip climbing Stromboli, and I'll link that. You can actually just click right here and go over to it. It'll also be in this video's full description if you click the title or show more. All right, so This is way, way back. You can see I've got my exposure information up here and what camera I was working with. I carried the older version of the 24 to 120, which I found to be a pretty good lens, stopped down a little bit, but nowhere near as good as the new modern Z 24 to 120, just kind of like everything Z. Although the 810, the D810, was a wonderful camera with a fantastic 36 megapixel sensor. It was eclipsed by the 850, but it was a fabulous camera. And as we got up there, sure enough, it was just erupting about every 15 minutes. It's a frequently erupting volcano that has been doing that throughout human history. They actually call these volcanoes that frequently erupt Strombolian because they are similar to Stromboli. Stromboli is this volcano that goes off like clockwork every 10 to 15 minutes. And as it got, oops, I hit the wrong button there. As it got darker, it started to be more visible what was happening through all that smoke. These just sparks and sputs. And you can see I was taking my exposure up, stopping down a little bit, lowering my ISO, working to not blow out that eruptive fire, all the little sparks coming out, and trying to capture. There are these little sort of popping things, and this is 15 seconds of it happening builds that little eruption. And this one at Blue Hour was just amazing, but I frequently talk to my workshop participants and people that I work with, whether online or in person, editing about saturation. And I say, I used to be guilty of oversaturating as well. And this actually isn't me pulling saturation sliders to make something more saturated. It's just that this scene was so saturated with the orange and yellow fire and the blue hour and the pink of sunsets afterglow lighting the clouds that it looks unreal. And it looked horrible in print. And the printers aren't capable of printing as many colors as monitors are able to display, and blues and yellow oranges are some of the most complicated for printers to get right. So the more saturation and the more contrasty tonality in those colors, the more difficult it is to get a good representation of that on ink and paper. And I was going for the gusto. You know, I have gotten now where I back off saturation on a lot of images below what the camera actually captured. This is a situation where I should have done that. All right, you can see there are tour boats down below. I also am not particularly happy with that tour boat being as out of focus as it is. This one's fine, it wasn't moving as much, but this one's steaming in for everyone on the tour boat to see the volcano from below. So I decided, you know, should I, and plus I had saved this as a Photoshop document. I'd done a little bit of work getting rid of the trail from the boat through the Mediterranean Sea there. And I decided, you know what, I should just sort of start from scratch. So here's the raw file of that image. You know, I had really boosted its exposure. And as I did that, saturation, everything else came out. I'm going to open up my side panel here. And oh, I'm still in the loop view. Hold on. Back in 2015, as I said, 10 years ago. Why don't we open it up and develop, and we'll see what I was actually doing. Oh, I flipped images. Here's that raw file. You can see in basic. This is straight out of the camera. And I've taken snapshots, all right? Snapshots are just a bookmark in the editing phase. If you're raw processing a file in Lightroom Classic and you like where you're at, you can click this plus, create a bookmark and name it. By default, it's just the date and time, but you can name it like I named this, just raw. And I went through and re-edited this with some of the nuance that exists in the latest version of Adobe Camera Raw that's built into Lightroom Classic, its raw engine. The process version is just nicer. And I edited it with a little more nuance. Now you can see it's still pretty pink, still pretty orange. I didn't really back saturation off. I just pulled back on the temperature a little bit. And you can see, you know, I went in and I looked at it, I did a little bit of noise reduction, but this was shot at 64 ISO with the D810. And you can see, and I didn't do any, no, actually I didn't do any noise reduction. I didn't do any noise reduction or sharpening. I didn't feel the need to. There you go. So having just kind of pulled that around, I didn't like this boat, as I said. And I didn't like this trail that I'd gotten rid of in the first one. And I noticed there was some noise. And so I took it into Photoshop and used the remove tool to get rid of the ribbon of the boat on the water and its current location as it was kind of drifting, and some of the noise, some of the dust that was on my sensor. And, well, actually, no. What am I saying? I did do that. I'll talk about that in a second. What I actually did first, noticing that it was a very clean image at base ISO, even after pulling the shadows up, was I took it through Lightroom's amazing super resolution. And if we look in here, you can see it's sharp. You can see there's basically no noise. You can see there's no problem or worry about noise or sharpness in this image. And it's a crazy scene with the lava flowing and spewing and exploding in there. So what I did was I went into Lightroom's photo enhance setting and ran super resolution. You can go in here and you can either denoise an image if it's really noisy, or you can super resolution, which will make this image very, very high resolution. You can see that off the get-go it was almost 5,000 pixels by 7360, 36 megapixels. Well, I ran it through super resolution and that made it intensely bigger. We can actually calculate that. You can find how many pixels by just multiplying the dimensions. So 9,824 pixels by 14,720. Multiply those two together and you'll find I just made this 144 megapixels from a 33 megapixel file, and look at how beautiful and sharp it remains. So now this can print as big as I want it to, all right? Super, super cool. So that was my first move, all right? Didn't really do anything other than just put it through super resolution. Then I took that super resolution file into Photoshop and I got rid of that boat trail with the remove tool, and I got rid of that boat that was kind of bothersome. I left this one, which is not as sharp as you might dream, but it's fine, and it kind of makes you feel like it's the sea down there. And then I went in and I printed this image, and right off the get-go, I found that in print, there was still too much saturation. There was still too much saturation. There was still too much contrast in the color. I printed this on really affordable Epson premium luster paper. It's kind of a photo paper that has beautiful blacks and color, but it doesn't have that wonderful feel of a more expensive fine art paper, but it's great for proofing. And I took a letter size sheet and just cut it in half. That's what I do. I run it through a cutter. I take letter size sheets, cut them in half. This is a Rick LePage trick, and print half letter for test prints so that you get 2 out of every 8.5 by 11 sheet. That's a very economical way to work with paper. So I looked at it and I thought, the color's a bit off, and I went in and I desaturated things a bit using the color mixer. So I jumped in and I took my little eyedropper and I clicked on the orange. And you can see this is the color swatch that I chose. And if I visualize the range, I worked on this range right here. You can sort of pull this range around and work on more or less, but I started off working on just this much. All right, I hit Command Z there to get right back where I had left it. And then I reprinted the image, and I printed it on Epson Platine paper, Legacy Platine, which is my favorite photo paper. I knew that this image was all about color and contrast, and I printed it on this paper, and I liked it better, but I still noticed that there was a bit of sort of pink and that there was some interesting blue going on that I wasn't particularly fond of. I printed it a little bit bigger to have a better look at it on Legacy Platine, because that was going to be my final printing, and as I looked at it, I really saw there's just some blue going on that doesn't look particularly natural. So I went in and I worked various sections of this. I worked where there was a bit more pink. I took my tool and clicked in the magenta portion of this fire. You know, if I turn this visualize range off, I worked in there. I worked in the little purple fringed area, and I tweaked each one by pulling saturation down, by pulling luminance down. I didn't really play with hue, maybe just a little bit, moving the orange toward yellow. See, and this is wonderful because you can click on a color and just adjust that individual color. And if you look at how it started and how it ended, that's a pretty massive shift that I just created, desaturating and pulling the luminance down. And one thing that I did too was I did a bit of soft proofing, and I watched, you know, as I'm soft proofing this image, I hit the S key, or you could go up into view and turn on soft proofing. But I'm soft proofing it for the paper that I want to be using, Legacy Platine. And as I can look at the gamut of the printer, and as I turn off what I did in this color mixer, you can see it's showing you what's out of gamut by kind of highlighting it in that bright, bright orange. That's showing me it wasn't able to print any of the detail in here. It was struggling with that. So I worked with these points color sources by clicking into the fire, and I kind of worked them back with saturation and luminance until, as I had that active right here, I got the whole volcanic eruption in gamut for the printer. Now, I don't often do that. I often don't worry about it, except that in these test prints that I was running, it really did look like a blob instead of all these individual little sparks and flames. And I wanted to get, that's the most important part of the whole scene for me. So working it back, and then I had those blue streaks through the ocean. So I went ahead and I clicked in this just part of the blue of the ocean, and I pulled saturation back in the blues, and I made the luminance just a little bit brighter, and I shifted the hue away from aqua towards violet just a little bit to kind of blend it into that sunset light. And by the time I was done, I'm going to turn off our soft proofing. This was the image that I had, and I ran a couple of test prints and got kind of what I was after, and decided, you know, what the heck, let's put it on a roll of legacy platine, and I love the result. All right, it really came out great. So it even was wife and family approved. So that one's going in the portfolio box as a potential choice for one of the 20 images. All right, I'm going to set that aside. So one of the things that I really had in mind climbing Stromboli wasn't just the blue hour shot of it erupting with all the color. It was the thought of having the volcano erupting with the sea in the background and then stars out above as blue hour faded to night. And that's one reason why I wanted to be there for an hour after sunset. And I had this plan, you know, that capture the volcano erupting, because that's going to be a really intense, you're going to have to stop down, long exposure to capture the whole eruption as it happens, and then wait till it's not erupting and it's a little bit darker into the blue hour and capture an image really targeted towards the stars, you know, that sort of 20 seconds, wide open, higher ISO. And then combine those two in post. That was my goal, you know, be able to capture the whole thing and just bring the stars into the image with the volcano, because it's not really possible to do it all in a single frame with the intense light in the foreground and then the dim light of the stars. So I will just say that I was very frustrated trying to edit those two images together with all the contrast, with all the noise, with everything that was happening with the tools and my skills 10 years ago. And I spent a couple days at it and basically kind of abandoned the effort. I never got to where I was happy with it. And so I thought, you know, I still have those base images. They're raw files. We have crazy tools. I've been doing a lot of editing in the intervening years. So let's run back and take a look at it. All right. So I'm gonna show you the two base images that I captured. All right. These are essentially straight out of camera. So here's the volcano erupting, pretty underexposed for the rest of the scene, as you can see. But you know, these sensors, particularly in the days that we had the Nikon D810, that was an amazing, amazing 36 megapixel sensor with an unbelievable amount of dynamic range, the ability to capture highlights and shadows and pull shadow detail. So I captured this at 125 ISO, pretty clean ISO, f8 to kind of not overexpose that volcano for 20 seconds. All right, I was just worried about not overdoing this heart of it. And you can see right out of the camera, there's no completely blown out highlights. All right, there's not even a specular highlight. It's just a very bright yellow. Almost pure white, but not quite. And then I waited until it was truly, you know, not erupting and the stars were coming out and the sky was dimming, and captured the stars. And in that case, I jacked the ISO up to 3200, stayed at f8, and went 20 seconds. I probably could have opened the exposure up a little bit, but I wanted it to look dim. I wanted it to match, all right? And, you know, I'm the first to admit, I really, really struggled with this in post-production and trying to get something that looked good, particularly something that looked good in print. And I won't even work with images that won't print well. So straight out of camera, the image looked like this. I came back to it this time and started editing that raw file. And I pulled up the shadows, and there's still a lot of saturation in this. This is sort of my first go at it. Maybe I needed some sleep because it's still very orange. But having a look at it, I could see, woo, pulling the shadows up in this file, there's a fair bit of noise at even at 125 ISO. It was so dark. And this is a lesson. If you capture things well exposed with good shadow detail at 3200 ISO, you won't deal with this. But even at 125 ISO, pulling shadows this intensely, from here, from black essentially to here, you're going to deal with noise. But what do we have now that we didn't have before? Well, the answer to that is going into the photo settings, enhance, just like we did with super resolution a minute ago, but instead running DeNoise. And you'll get a preview here of what this does to the noise in the image, and it's pretty darned incredible. Okay, you're looking at it about 200–300%, but it's really getting rid of that noise. And I went through and determined I liked about 68, and I ran DeNoise on this file. And so you can see the result here, right? It says enhanced noise reduction. This has been denoised, and when we zoom in and take a look at that, wow, look at how clean a file that output for us. That's just awesome, all right? So I went into this noise reduced file, and I did a little bit of printing, and it seemed immediately to me, I was working to try and kind of brighten up the sky. I put way too much saturation in it, and my initial print, certainly enough, wound up having way too much blue, way too much orange. The fire and the lava was just kind of blobbed out, and there's this horrible line in the sky where you can see that the printer just couldn't reproduce this transition between blue to the atmosphere. It was just, everything was way too bright, all right? So I thought, I need to do some significant work to this image. You can see I had gone in and done a whole bunch of masking, and different things. I'll show you the highlights of different things I was masking to try to just bring out the sky, and I was just going for too much initially as I went through this edit of this. I could get shadow detail, and I was trying to do it, right? So I thought, let's tweak this a little bit. And I got rid of some of those masks, and I just toned everything back a little bit. And I printed this image, and I still found in my second test print on legacy platine paper that the sky was much better. I got rid of that horrible blue line where it couldn't quite reproduce the blue and ink that I was seeing on the screen, and it had that hard edge. Got a more natural, more nuanced, kind of a soft look to the sky that matched the foreground. It feels like night. There's stars in it, which started kind of reminding me, that's right, this was a night image to begin with. We're not trying to make it daylight. And as I said, I got rid of a lot of the masks I had made before, and I did a more targeted set. Let me show you what I did with masking here. And I'll keep point color open, and I'll keep my controls open. So these are the things inside the mask. All right, down below is our normal basic panel. We can just close that down. I didn't really work in there. These are all masks. All right. So in the first mask, what I'm doing is just darkening the smoke around the actual eruption a little bit. All right. The second mask was simply to kind of hide this distraction of these brighter rocks. I think it might have been headlamps from us and other people shining on the closer rocks that were in the frame. And so I just went in and took a brush and painted those in a little bit and darkened them, right? I pulled the exposure down, I pulled contrast back, I pulled the shadows back, and made those kind of disappear into the background. But I wanted more shadow detail, so I went in with a brush and I brightened up some of the shadow detail that was interesting in the frame, like the edge around the mountain and these interesting colors in here, right? And then I went in and I did some point color work where I really only wanted to affect the oranges in the eruption itself, because we were getting such garish kind of color in our print. And it probably, now that I'm looking at it, was a little bit garish in the actual photo too. So you can see what I did here. I've just worked with the oranges in the frame. I didn't touch a slider except using this point color, which is a really powerful tool in Lightroom Classic. You can grab this eyedropper and click on a color that you want to adjust. In this case, I clicked on orange, and I just pulled its luminance back a little bit. I pulled its saturation back a little bit, and I pulled its color temperature back a little bit, just in those kind of basic sliders. I took it away from the warm towards the cool, and then I backed its saturation, actually I boosted its saturation a touch and backed its luminance down. And you can see, you know, turning that on and off. I also played around with the blues in the image a little bit. I backed its blues saturation off just a smidge, all right? That's all I did. So I turned this, if I turn that mask off and on, just subtle but impressive. And all of a sudden we've got a lot more detail in here, and it's more printable detail, all right? And then I wanted to work on the sky a little bit. So I dropped another one of these gradient masks in here where it's only affecting what's up above, where the red dot is. And you can adjust how much feather by grabbing these control points and pulling it farther apart. I'll hit undo. Say, where is this effect being applied? It's all being applied above that line. It's being blended in between the two lines, and none of it's being affected below the line. So I'm not affecting that image down here at all. And what I wanted to do was just darken the shadows up a little bit, right? And darken the exposure just a little bit in the sky. Get that kind of sky looking more normal. And then I wanted to work on everything but the volcano and give it a little bit of a reverse vignette effect by just boosting the contrast. I particularly wanted the stars to pop out a little bit. And the resultant print that I got was very close to what I was looking for. I thought, I really like this. This is getting there, right? Colors are good, the detail in the eruption is good, there's no garishness around sort of its lava blowing up and bubbling in the center. It all looks very natural. Liking it. This is kind of what I was after in the beginning. So all right, I've got an image that I love. It's printing really well, but I still didn't really have the stars in it to the degree that I had originally been intending. The reason why I took this second image during the later evening, right before we left, when the mountain wasn't erupting, to be able to get more stars and blend them into the frame. You know, I love this image. I love that we've got a couple of planets in it and some dim stars, but I was hoping for more stars in eruption and sea. So I thought, you know, I'm gonna push my luck. I'm gonna try to go just a little further and blend some of those stars from the later nights, capture in with it. So I'm gonna jump into my grid view, and I've got this image that I've proofed, right? And I've gotten printing well, and I've got this image of the stars. And I thought to myself, all I really want is to bring the stars from that image into this. And knowing a little bit about Photoshop and some of its blending modes, if you're putting two images together as layers, you can have the underlying layer only blend in things that are brighter than the layer above. And so the thing that I did in this to just get the stars to come out was I did a little processing, some heavy processing of this. Very simple. All I did was pulled the blacks all the way down almost down to a -100. I pushed the exposure up a little bit just to brighten the stars. I pushed the whites up a fair bit to make sure that they were, you know, it's not that much. I think the stars are this little bump right here. I didn't want them blown out, but I wanted them bright, all right? I pulled the shadows back a little bit. And basically by just doing this and pulling the saturation way down so I'm not dealing with any color, this part of the frame just has good stars to blend in to my volcanic eruption. Looking over the same piece of horizon at the same sky just minutes afterward. So what to do, how to blend these two, right? So I went in, I'm back in my grid view, I hit the G key just to go back to grid. I could click this button too. And I'm going to just command click our edited image with just the planets and the stars. And I've got both of them selected now. I'm gonna right click and I just say edit in Photoshop 2025 is one way that would open as two separate images, but better yet for what we wanna do was open as layers in Photoshop. And what that got me was this Photoshop document I have right here. I'm gonna open it up in Photoshop to show you where I actually have it open in Photoshop in the background. So here it is, all right? And I'm gonna change my workspace to be a single screen workspace for you to be able to see what's going on here. So these opened as two separate layers here, all right? And the star layer is underneath the eruption layer, all right? So if I turn this off, you'll just see there's stars up there. And I've erased a lot of that through a layer mask, all right? I have a layer mask here, and when you put a layer mask out over any part of an image, if you paint on that layer mask, it hides that part of that layer, all right? So if I was to go up here to layer and say, add a layer mask that hides everything, boom, everything would disappear in this image unless I took a white brush on the layer mask with it selected. If I took a white paintbrush and I said I want 100% opacity and I started painting back in, I can make my brush really big and I'm gonna paint my image back in. All right, I'm at 100% opacity with a soft brush. I could say, ooh, I really only wanna paint 28% of it in. See how that's working, all right? I could paint it in there. Now we're getting the blues. I want to get rid of this whole layer mask. I'm going to delete that layer mask. I'm going to get our image back. I have it sitting on top of stars, and I got rid of that lower part of the star image where it had the horizon in it because that was bright, right? I just went in with a layer mask and I painted it out, and all I left that was interesting was stars in the part of the scene where I might want them in my image. And I put it underneath our image on the layers, so my layer's up above, and I used a blending mode called lighten. And what lighten means is that the only thing that will come through the layer when it blends the two together are things that are brighter than the overlying layer. And the only thing in this that is brighter than this are the stars. And therefore, we wind up with nothing but those extra stars being blended into our base image from the image that we took a little bit later without the volcanic eruption under a different exposure, right? Very intentional, a very simple way to bring those into the frame without a lot of work, all right? Without changing the color, without changing the contrast, without changing the tonality at all in the image that we just proofed and printed and got looking great. I've just added those stars into it with some of the know-how I have now I did not have before, all right? So I'll go ahead and I'll close down Photoshop here. Here is our resultant image with the stars added in, all right? So this is without, this is with it added in. I went ahead and worked at printing those, liked my results on 8.5 by 11, printing them a little bit bigger. I tweaked the sky a little bit more. I went in and just did a little bit of point color in the blue part of the sky, and then printed it big on 24-inch roll feed, and I'm really liking the result, right? I got to looking at it and I thought, I just wonder, you know, what would this whole thing look like in black and white? It's really dramatic, and maybe I could push the tonality and the contrast in a way to really make it pop in black and white that the color was actually getting in my way with the blues and the oranges. And so I went ahead, I did a conversion, and I just pushed it. I brought the shadows up. I used some masking. I made the sky darker where the stars were. I just brought it in with a little bit of those same linear masks, those same kind of graduated linear masks that mimic what we used to do in the film days and early days of digital with glass filters that can now be so easily accomplished with bracketing and with post-production tools like this. And I went ahead and did a couple of test prints. I printed it on Epson's Legacy Fiber, which is a wonderful fine art paper that I love for a lot of black and whites. And then I printed it on my beloved Platine paper again. And I really, really liked it on the Platine. I went back and forth a bit. I had a number of people look at it because I couldn't make up my own mind. And pretty much everybody thought that just the extra black and the extra pop of the Platine and that little bit of finish on the Platine paper, the photo paper, worked a little bit better for this image despite it being black and white. And I printed it, and I really have no idea. I'm gonna have to poll other photographers and Rick LePage especially, but other people, and put these two big prints side by side and choose whether I prefer the color, which I would have thought initially absolutely, or whether I prefer the black and white. And really, it has to be printed big. The 24-inch roll feed, at least I feel like, for me to really get a gauge on whether I like the black and white or the color better. They're very, very different representations of exactly the same image. But I'm really, really happy, you know, something that I wanted to do 10 years ago, something that I set out to do. I really found well, plus, you know, we were pregnant with our first child, and getting stars blended into the volcanic eruption got to be slightly less important when we got home and we're facing having children for the first time. But it's really cool now to go back with the tools that I have in my hand and reprocess these. And I'm telling you, there's no way I would get as great at processing without having the printing. Ooh, that doesn't look right on paper. Go back, edit, 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 to get to the level where I'm getting what I'm getting on the screen and I'm getting what I'm getting in print. You know, I think that there is no doubt that becoming a printer is a whole new art that takes your photo editing skills to a whole nother level. And it also informs some of your actions in the field. You know, would I shoot it with slightly different settings if I were to be able to go back? 100%. When I'm looking at ink on paper, I see all the flaws magnified, particularly the bigger I print it. And I start to realize what I might have done differently in the field. It informs your editing, it informs your capture. I really, really, truly believe that printing your own images makes you a better photographer. So let me wrap the trip up here, and then I'll come in with a few final thoughts. We came down from Stromboli. I remember with full moon rose as we were coming down in the dark. I couldn't get any good images of it, but it was amazing. We headed to France, and we spent a couple days in Paris going through museums. We rented a car, went out to Mount Saint-Michel. I saw this sunset getting ready to go. Stacy was starving to death. She was sitting over on these stairs wanting to go to dinner as the sunset in summer in France and Normandy. And the sunset just fizzled. And I was like, oh, hun, get something to eat, you know, hang out because Blue Hour is going to be amazing. And it was worthwhile for me to stay, but I still feel bad, you know. We did go out and get dinner. We got some spaghetti. It was a fascinating evening. And then we got back to Paris, and we were able to see Bastille Day and the fireworks over the Eiffel Tower before heading home and starting the next big phase of our life. So really an epic, epic trip. And it's so fun to be able to get some of the primo prints that I wanted from that. I mean, a major objective of mine were Mount Saint-Michel, which I'm going to start reworking and printing now that I've got the Stromboli images done. But to be able to get those Stromboli images were a big deal to me. So I'm happy with that. All right, everybody. So little shout out, check out the office hours that we did this week. We went through a gallery of all of your images, amazing work. So fun to see what everybody's been doing this last 6 months. It was a free photography group get together. I'm gonna put a link to that video right here where you can see all the images of people in the community that submitted and we went over them. Next time we do that, if you didn't get your image this time, we'll be doing another one later in the year, and they're always so much fun. So look out for those and submit your images to just join in the fun. Links to everything that I use and recommend is up on my website over at hudsonhenry.com/ATS links. You can click right here to go over there. Those links really help me out, so I thank you so much for using them. We're gearing up for our Mount Rainier workshop. That's the next one coming up soon. We got a great crew. I love, love, love that park. I can't wait to get back in there photographing old growth forest, wildlife like marmots, wildflowers, mountain scenes, reflections in lakes. It's a spectacular place, and I'm looking forward to it. So I hope all of you are finding ways to stay active, stay creative, stay safe, and we'll see you next week.